This girl manipulated him. She must have tricked him in his final days. There is no other explanation. And others began nodding, whispering ugly assumptions, their voices sharp with envy and bitterness. But Maya found her voice at last, quiet yet steady as she whispered, "I never asked for this," her words trembling with truth. Though only a few in the room truly heard her, and as the arguments grew louder, the lawyer struck the table with his hand to command silence, his eyes narrowing as he declared that Robert Grant had spoken highly of Maya in private many times, often telling him that she was the only one who treated him as a man, not as a bank, and that she had shown more kindness in one conversation than many of his relatives had in a lifetime. And though his words cut through the noise, they also deepened the fury of those who felt cheated, their anger now boiling over, as one cousin sneered, "So kindness is worth millions now. Is that it?" He lost his mind, and now we all suffer. But the lawyer refused to falter, reminding them that greed had no claim in the face of a man's final wishes. And as he spoke, Maya's thoughts drifted back to the times she had shared with Mr. Grant, the evenings she sat by his side, reading books, when his health had weakened, the quiet talks about life when everyone else had been too busy to listen, and how he once told her that true wealth was not in money but in the heart that valued people above things. And slowly tears welled in her eyes, not for the inheritance but for the loss of the man who had believed in her when no one else did. And though the room was filled with anger, for her it was filled with memory, and as she wiped her cheek quickly so no one would see, the lawyer closed the will with finality, stating again that everything was hers. And while half the room sat in stunned silence, the other half broke into heated arguments, vowing to challenge the decision, though deep down they knew they could not. And amid the chaos, Maya rose from her chair, her legs trembling yet carrying her forward, and in a voice firmer than she thought possible, she said, "I never wanted his money, but I will honor him by living the way he wanted, by choosing kindness." And though her words were simple, they rang through the room louder than the shouts of anger, making some pause and others scoff. But for Maya, it was not about proving herself to them. It was about keeping the promise she once made to a man who treated her like family. And as she stepped out of the grand dining room, leaving behind the storm of greed and resentment, she carried with her not just the weight of a fortune, but the heavier, more important responsibility of guarding the legacy of the man who had seen her worth when everyone else chose to look away. Maya stood in the cold hallway just outside the grand dining room, her heart still pounding from the storm of voices that had followed her out. And though the walls of the mansion seemed to press in with the echoes of greed and anger, she forced herself to breathe deeply, reminding herself of the man who had believed in her and the promise she had just made to honor him. Yet even as she clung to that thought, doubts crept in, whispering that she was too young, too unprepared, and too unwanted by those around her to carry such a heavy responsibility. And as she turned toward the staircase, she could feel pairs of eyes burning into her back, some filled with resentment, others with curiosity, and a few with cold calculation, as though they were already plotting how to make her stumble. And when she reached the landing, she paused, for standing there was Mrs. Grant, Robert's sister, a woman with sharp eyes and a voice that could silence a room. And though she had said little during the will reading, the weight of her presence now made Maya's chest tighten. But instead of shouting, Mrs. Grant simply stepped closer and whispered, "Do not think this will be easy, child. They will come for you in ways you cannot imagine. And the question is not whether you can hold the fortune, but whether you can hold your heart." And with those words, she left Maya trembling, for they were not a threat but a warning, one that settled heavily in her thoughts as she returned to the small guest room where she had been staying. And there, in the quiet, she sat on the edge of the bed with her hands shaking, trying to understand what it meant to carry not only wealth but also the weight of jealousy, greed, and expectation. And as the night grew darker, she heard footsteps in the hall, hurried whispers behind doors, and even the faint sound of someone crying, as though the house itself had become a battlefield where love and hate collided. And she realized that though Robert had trusted her, his decision had lit a fire that would test everyone, including herself, and the true battle was only beginning. For soon she would face not only those who wanted her inheritance but also the temptation to let bitterness, fear, or pride guide her choices. And as she finally closed her eyes, she made a quiet prayer that she would have the strength to remain kind, even when kindness would seem like the hardest path. But deep down, she knew the days ahead would test her heart in ways she had never known. And somewhere in the shadows of the mansion, unseen eyes watched her, waiting for the moment when the new heiress would falter. For in their minds, she had inherited not just wealth but a throne built on envy. And every throne demands a test of the one who dares to sit upon it. The morning light crept slowly into the mansion, spilling across its marble floors like a quiet promise of change. Yet for Maya, the day felt heavier than any before, because she knew it was not just another sunrise but the beginning of her true test, the moment when everyone would be watching to see if she was strong enough to carry what Robert had left in her hands. And as she dressed in the simple clothes she had always worn, ignoring the expensive fabrics waiting in the closet, she reminded herself that she was still the same girl, even if the world now saw her as the heiress of a fortune, and as she walked down to the dining room, she could hear the murmur of voices already gathered. Cousins and uncles and strangers with blood ties to Robert, all pretending politeness, while their eyes carried hunger, and when she entered the room, a silence fell so sharp it made her skin prickle. But she did not shrink. She lifted her chin and remembered Robert's words about courage, and she spoke softly yet firmly, saying that she would not sell the businesses. She would not throw away his years of work, but instead she would continue his dream of giving opportunities to those who had none. And as she spoke, she noticed a shift in the air, some sneering, some laughing under their breath, others narrowing their eyes like hunters circling prey. Yet there were also a few who seemed surprised, even touched, as though they had not expected a girl so young and dismissed to carry such resolve. And when Mrs. Grant finally rose and said, "Let us see if her actions match her words," Maya's heart raced, for she knew this was the beginning of trials that would prove if she deserved what she had been given. And over the next weeks, she walked through endless rooms of papers, accounts, and plans, guided by Robert's old advisors who were skeptical at first, but began to respect her when they saw how carefully she listened, how she asked questions without shame, and how she refused to make decisions without considering the people whose lives depended on them. And though many tried to sabotage her, whispering rumors or placing obstacles in her path, she remained steady, reminding herself that wealth was not about shining jewels or grand halls, but about responsibility. And each night when she sat by the window with tired eyes, she thought of Robert, imagining his kind smile and hoping he would be proud. And slowly, people within the mansion, and even outside, began to notice that the girl they had mocked was not weak. She was strong in a way they could not understand, not with fists or harshness, but with patience, fairness, and an unshaken heart. And when the day came that she announced the opening of a new scholarship in Robert's name, offering education to children who, like her once, had been overlooked, the air in the hall shifted again, for many who had only seen her as an outsider now saw something greater. And though envy still burned in some eyes, others began to soften, realizing that she was not there to strip away their pride, but to carry forward a legacy that honored everyone. And in that moment, Maya felt a peace she had never known, because she understood that the true inheritance was not the fortune, but the chance to change lives. And though the path ahead would still be filled with challenges, she was no longer afraid, for she had found her place, her purpose. And as the evening fell, and she stood in the courtyard with the stars above, she whispered to herself that this was not just Robert's dream anymore, it was hers too. And with each step she took from then on, the mansion no longer felt like a prison of greed, but like the beginning of a dawn where her life, and the lives of many others, would be forever changed. The large wooden doors of the mansion opened slowly, letting in a draft of cold air as Maya stepped inside, her hands nervously clutching the strap of her worn handbag, her eyes wide at the sight of chandeliers hanging like frozen raindrops from the ceiling, and walls lined with portraits of stern-looking ancestors staring down at her, as though they were already questioning her right to be there. And though she wanted to shrink back out into the night, the sound of voices carried from the sitting room pulled her forward, voices filled with laughter, whispers, and the clinking of glasses, all belonging to people who had arrived dressed in expensive suits and elegant gowns, their presence so polished it only made Maya's plain skirt and simple sweater feel even smaller. She walked in slowly, and the moment her figure appeared in the doorway, the room fell quieter, with eyes flicking toward her in quick glances that seemed to say she did not belong. And a few cousins of the late wealthy man even smirked openly, whispering behind hands, their mocking gazes cutting deep. Yet she forced her trembling legs to move and found a seat at the back of the long table where the lawyer, a gray-haired man with sharp glasses, shuffled papers in a leather folder, waiting for the room to settle. Around her sat the man's sons, daughters, nephews, and nieces, all glancing toward the folder with hungry anticipation, their smiles thin and eyes sharp, as if they were already counting the wealth they assumed would soon be theirs. But among their impatience, Maya sat quietly, remembering how the old man, Mr. Grant, had once taken time to speak to her when no one else did, how he offered her tea in his garden, how he asked about her dreams when others brushed her aside, and she felt a strange mixture of sadness and hope being in that room, though she could not understand why she had been called. The silence thickened when one of the women at the table leaned forward and said in a low but cutting voice, "Why is she even here? She's not family." And another chuckled softly, agreeing, their words sharp enough for Maya to hear, though she kept her eyes lowered, trying not to let the sting show on her face, her heart pounding like a drum inside her chest. And before the lawyer could speak, a man in his 50s slammed his hand on the table and demanded the reading begin quickly, as though he feared the longer it took, the more chance of unwelcome surprises. The lawyer cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses, and began to explain that the will was long and detailed, but every word written by Mr. Grant himself. And as he started to read, the relatives leaned in with interest, nodding and smiling. As the first few lines spoke of gratitude, love, and recognition of family, yet their eyes kept darting back to Maya, each glance filled with confusion, suspicion, and growing irritation, as though her presence was a puzzle they were desperate to solve. And while the lawyer's voice echoed steadily through the high-ceilinged room, Maya sat frozen, her hands clasped tightly together, wondering if tonight she would discover the reason behind her invitation or if she would only leave humiliated. Nothing more than the subject of cruel whispers, and though no one knew it yet, the air carried a weight of something hidden, something that would soon break open their greedy certainty and shift every stare in that room directly onto her. But in that moment, all she could do was listen, her breath held, her heart aching, and her life unknowingly on the edge of change. The lawyer's voice carried through the long dining room as he continued reading Mr. Grant's will, his tone calm but his words sharp enough to slice through the heavy silence that settled over the table. And though the fire in the grand fireplace crackled softly, its warmth could not soften the chill of hostility in the air, as every eye kept flicking toward Maya, who sat quietly at the far end, her small hands clutching the edge of her chair, like it was the only anchor keeping her steady. And while the lawyer spoke of donations to charities, gifts to employees, and a few special mementos left to close relatives, the family members began shifting uncomfortably, some frowning at the idea that money was being given away when they expected it all to be theirs, their whispers growing louder and more careless until one cousin muttered, "This is ridiculous, wasting fortune on outsiders," and another smirked, leaning close to say loud enough for Maya to hear, "Some people here will walk away with nothing but crumbs, especially those who don't belong in the first place," making a few others chuckle under their breath. But their cruel laughter made Maya's stomach tighten and her cheeks burn as she tried to keep her head lowered, pretending not to notice, though inside she felt every word like a weight pressing her chest. And before she could find courage to breathe, a sharp female voice broke through the room, one of the late man's daughters who had always believed she deserved everything, saying, "Why are we wasting time? This girl has no claim here, she's not even blood, so why is she sitting with us like she matters?" In the room filled with murmurs of agreement, heads nodding, eyes hardening, some even glaring directly at Maya as if her very presence had stolen something from them. But the lawyer paused, his gaze lifting toward Maya with a calmness that seemed to silence the worst of the whispers, though not before another man, older and bitter, leaned back with folded arms and sneered, "This must be some kind of joke, dragging in a charity case to sit with us, as if she could understand what it means to inherit real wealth." And laughter followed him like smoke, curling through the air and leaving Maya's heart pounding so hard she could hardly hear the lawyer's next words. Yet she stayed seated, refusing to leave, because something inside told her she needed to know what Mr. Grant had written, and maybe this was the moment everything would make sense. The lawyer cleared his throat again, cutting through the noise, reminding everyone that the will would be read in full without interruption, and though his voice carried authority, the glares and whispers didn't vanish completely, they only softened like coals glowing under ash, waiting to flare again. And as the words of the will revealed more details, more donations, more mentions of loyalty and kindness, some family members grew restless, drumming fingers on the polished table, exchanging impatient glances, and one of them, trying to provoke Maya, leaned forward and hissed, "You're wasting your time sitting here, sweetheart, there's nothing for you. He just felt sorry for you, that's all." And though Maya's eyes stung with unshed tears, she held them back, remembering the kind way Mr. Grant used to smile at her, how he never once looked at her with pity, but rather with respect, and that memory gave her the strength to sit straighter, even as cruel words echoed around her like stones being thrown. The lawyer's voice, steady and unwavering, soon reached a passage that made the room fall into stunned silence, his tone clear as he read, "To the one I have seen show true courage and persistence, to the one who has treated me not as a man of fortune but as a human being, I leave not just a portion but the very heart of my estate." And though the lawyer did not name the heir, yet every head turned sharply toward Maya, some with disbelief, others with outrage, the cruelest whispers now replaced with gasps of shock. And in that suspended moment, Maya felt the weight of every stare burn against her skin, her chest tight, with fear and hope colliding, as if her entire life hung on the next words that would leave the lawyer's lips. And while no one spoke, the silence itself felt louder than the insults that had filled the room just moments before, silence that carried both dread and anticipation. As the cruel words faded into nothing more than the memory of a storm before an even greater revelation was about to break, the lawyer took a deep breath as if he understood the weight of the words he was about to reveal. And though the room was filled with the ticking of the grandfather clock and the faint crackle of the fire, no one dared to speak, their eyes locked on him, waiting for the final part of the passage. And then in a voice calm yet strong, he continued, "Therefore, I, Robert Grant, leave the entirety of my fortune, my house, my businesses, and all assets to Maya James." And for a moment there was nothing but stunned silence, as if the air had been stolen from the room, before gasps erupted, followed by the scraping of chairs and shouts of disbelief. with one of the daughters slamming her hand against the polished table so hard the glasses rattled as she shouted, "This is outrageous. She is nothing but a child we barely know. How can she inherit everything?" While another cousin's voice cracked with anger as he demanded to see proof, claiming there must have been a mistake, but the lawyer calmly lifted the signed and sealed document, reminding everyone that Mr. Grant had prepared the will with full clarity of mind, that it had been witnessed, and that it was legally binding beyond question. Yet the words did little to soothe the chaos now swirling around Maya, who sat frozen in her chair, her heart racing so fast she could barely breathe. The reality of what had just been said, struggling to break through the disbelief, clouding her thoughts. And though part of her wanted to run from the table, another part of her knew she had to face what was happening, even as hateful glares pressed against her like walls closing in. And it was then that one of the uncles, his face red with rage, pointed directly at her and shouted,